What's going on, guys? Dan with PC Tech Hustle coming at you with another video, and today we got for you guys a little bit of a different build. This isn't necessarily a build that's targeting any kind of budget range, mainly because I don't even know what these parts are worth nowadays. It really is just a build that is from a client who has dumped some parts on me that finally wants to put his PC together. The client has actually had these parts on hand for around about 5 to 6 years. All of them still brand new, fresh in the box. Some of them even still with the shrink wrap on them. So this might trigger some of you guys. Why would you sit on parts for so long? But you know, that's okay. You know, sometimes that happens. Life gets busy, and you know, I'm glad they still held out for me to build the PC for them. But aside from that, these parts are, yes, about 5 years old. And as you can see, especially with this Cooler Master HAF case, you can't even find these things brand new anymore. But actually, which kind of, I think, brings a little bit of excitement to the build. So really, let's just take a quick look here what we have on the table. Some of these parts, you know, being 5 to 6 years old, and is it really going to be a fit gaming rig for today's 2020 gaming? Let's get cracking. All right, guys, so let's quickly jump into the parts here, and let's just start off here with the i7 that we have sitting up here on top of the case. So we got an i7 6700k that he bought brand new at the time of, and so we got 4 cores, 8 threads, 6th gen i7. Yeah, obviously we're at 10th gen and nowadays, but great thing about this chip is it's still a very viable option for putting together a system. It's got overclocking potential, so I think we'll be just fine with this. For cooling, he picked up a Hyper 212, so we're just, obviously, these coolers have withstood the test of time. Great coolers. I highly recommend these coolers, and they're usually my go-to if I'm trying to put together some type of budget cooling option. They basically fit every CPU socket and model, so I have no doubt that this will do and serve its purpose well. So let's move on to the next box that we have sitting here at the top. So this one is really cool. So this is a GeForce GTX 1070. Again, a little bit of a dated card nowadays, but the really neat thing about this is a Founders Edition. So this will actually be the first time I actually get my hands on a Founder Edition card. And actually, I didn't actually quite know that Gigabyte produced these. But anyway, so we got Founders Edition, GTX 1070. Should be plenty of gaming GPU horsepower for pretty much anything nowadays. So I don't think we're gonna have any problems putting this guy inside our Cooler Master case. So I guess speaking of case here, let's just pull that guy over in front of us. So this is the Cooler Master HAF full tower case. So definitely a bit dated in terms of design and case aesthetics nowadays. This was definitely the go-to big time, everybody wanted case back in, you know, I would say late 2000s, mid 2000 teens-ish time frame. But yeah, I mean, it's not something that you can probably even find nowadays anymore. If you do, I bet it costs more than what he actually paid for it brand new. But this sucker is brand new. It even had the plastic wrap on it, so I mean, we still even got little peely stickers to pull off of it. But should be completely fine for the build. I mean, it's just not going to be up to aesthetic spec for nowadays, but whatever, that's not a big deal. So let's grab the motherboard here real fast so we can talk about that. So we got a Gigabyte Z170X Gaming 7, so going to be probably one of your higher end motherboards of its era. Going to have good VRMs for overclocking, which we may do a little bit of. Still supports some modern day peripheral plugins, being a USB Type-C, USB 3.1, Thunderbolt. So all that stuff is still good. This is still a good, relevant motherboard in today's standard. And for RAM, we got 16 gigs of G.Skill Ripjaw at 2400 megahertz. Yeah, not terribly fast RAM, but at the same time, Intel doesn't necessarily have that steep speed requirement like AMD does, so this should be perfectly fine to get them off to the races. For storage, we got a Samsung Evo VNAND 850, 500 gig, so this should be plenty for getting Windows installed and getting several games installed even, and having some space left over for whatever he wants to store, and maybe later down the line we can throw in a storage drive for him. And lastly, you guys might be wondering what's in the box. So what's in the box? But this is actually a Blu-ray player, so he picked it up back kind of in the day of where they're a bit more relevant. So I figured, well, since he spent the money on it, I mean, I might as well go ahead and install it. But definitely something you don't really see these days anymore as far as CD-ROMs or DVD-ROMs or any kind of Blu-ray devices going into PCs anymore. Everything's basically downloaded. But since he spent the money on it, which he probably spent a pretty good chunk of change on back in the day, I'm gonna go ahead and put it in the PC. It's still a sealed box and everything, so it's going in since he bought it. All right guys, one last item I forgot to mention when we were up close looking at the parts is the power supply for the machine. We got a Corsair 850 RMX power supply, fully modular, so it's gonna be plenty of juice to handle all the components that you see here to make this a good gaming rig fit for whatever he wants to do with it. Alrighty guys, so that pretty much covers all the parts here now that we've discussed them all kind of up close. And though some of them are kind of dated, at the same time, this is still gonna be a pretty potent build. And I think it speaks volumes on if you, I guess, buy it nice, you don't buy it twice, right? So he bought nice components back in the day and there's still gonna be very relevant components for 2020. So let's cut over to a montage of putting this PC together and then we'll check out some gaming benchmarks and we'll conclude this video. Alrighty guys, so build is now complete, and yes, I don't advise you guys putting together an entire build before testing any parts like I did, especially if they've been sitting in boxes for 5 to 6 years. So probably wasn't a good idea on my part, but yeah, don't do what I did. So anyway, let's see if this guy boots up. So got the power, flip that on the back. See if I can find the power switch here. There it is. Okay, let's see what we get here. I'm going to just mash the delete button to see if I can get into BIOS. That's what we're hoping for. That looks good. Woo! Okay, so we got a good working system. Let's see what we got here. So CPU running at actually 4.2 gigahertz out of the box. I'd have to look up the specs on these things, but that's pretty awesome to see. We got stock memory frequency as to be expected, but full 16 gigs of memory that we installed in the system. So I'd say everything's looking as it should. CPU temperature in BIOS 33 degrees. That means we got a good cooler mount. We're looking good. So honestly, at this point, I just got to get Windows installed and we'll do some benchmarks. I may not do all my full benchmark suite on this. We'll see. That does take some time, and this is a client build that needs to get back, but definitely looking good. So we'll cut over to that here in a little bit and run it through some games and see how she does. Alrighty guys, so I hope you enjoyed the build montage and the benchmarks. Yeah, the benchmarks weren't really necessarily an absolute needed thing in this type of video, mainly because the age of the parts, but I wanted to go ahead and throw that in there as something to kind of add as a little extra value to the video and kind of see what this 5-year-old brand new PC, as I'm calling it, can do in today's 2020 standards. As mentioned before too, this build was strictly just documenting the process of grabbing the parts from a client that we had put together on a parts list years ago and finally putting the system together. So I wanted to document the process, and that's what the whole real purpose of this video is for. Though I was pretty curious to see what a older i7 6700K of about 5 years now paired with a GTX 1070 can do in today's modern 2020 gaming, and I was very surprised. It's definitely a great butter smooth gaming experience still to this day. And also guys, I want to mention too, I'm not really leaving any links to any of the parts in this build down in the description. I really can't recommend the parts, mainly because they're older. Not to say that they're not great parts, which they are, but the problem is you can't really find these parts anymore. They're out of stock, so if you do happen to find them, you're going to see a massive markup in price, and it's just not going to be good for price to performance. So I'll leave other parts down in the description, which I typically have in my descriptions of my videos. Some things that I use that are kind of more on the modern level and things that I use day to day. So check those out down below. Definitely helps give a little bit of a kickback to the channel. And before we go guys, make sure you do the YouTube thing right. Give me a like if you enjoyed this content. Give me a comment. I'm curious if you have a similar build to this one back here, and how well is it standing up in today's 2020 gaming? Let me know. Other than that, here are a couple other videos I got queued up for you. Go ahead and check those out. Thanks for tuning into this one. I appreciate your time, and I'll catch you in the next one.